Extinction patterns as we approach 2012 with Brent Miller. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Now, Brent Miller is considered an expert in e-commerce systems, and he has spent several times developing patents and is now working with the Horizon Project research team. Many top researchers, scientists to unlock the greatest mysteries of our world. Brent was on with me almost a year ago, Brent, wasn't it?
Almost 2 years ago, yeah.
Oh, I got it's right, 2 years.
Flies.
How quickly it flies. How have you been?
Oh, very good. I appreciate being back on again, and we have new material to show. And the evidence that we presented last time, I'm not going to cover as much of that because there is much more evidence. We actually are getting more evidence to show that what we did believe was coming right around the corner absolutely is coming.
Well, here we go.
We're on the doorstep.
Give us a little update and review of the Horizon Project for people who don't remember almost 2 years ago.
Okay. The Horizon Project, we have an obsession to know the truth, similar to yourself, George.
Absolutely.
And it takes a lot of work because this world is too opinionated. So we have a research team and contributors from scientists in pretty much every field, covering all corners of the globe. And what we try to resolve are the world's most puzzling, almost in-your-face anomalies, such as, cities, massive stone cities, dozens of square miles large underneath the ocean surface, those type of anomalies. And then based on scientific gathering of evidence, we're forced to conclude that Earth's history, not just recent history, but the long-term Earth history and our inevitable future, immediate future, is not what we've been taught. We've been taught that Earth changes. Earth changes are slow and gradual and occur over thousands or millions of years. An example of this, for example, would be the forming of the Grand Canyon or the slow continental drift, where we've been taught that it took millions of years to separate Asia from the United States in the forming of the Atlantic Ocean. We simply don't find the true scientific evidence to support that. In fact, there is overwhelming evidence that shows that whereas these slow changes do occur over thousands of years, the planet mostly undergoes dramatic global catastrophic upheavals in a cyclic fashion, and it appears to be in a rather disturbing frequency. The most catastrophic of all these upheavals is what I'm referring to as a pole shift.
And these upheavals, though as you mentioned, science says that these things happen over millions of years, they don't factor in, Brent, the calamity, the rapid event that could occur, which also triggers some of these to happen pretty quickly, do they?
No, in fact, they don't. In fact, most of these calamities that you see around the planet can only be explained by sudden catastrophic events. Let's refer the Atlantic Ridge in the Atlantic Ocean. The modern day theories that just do not hold evidence when you really look down into the actual scientific data, where the continents separated over millions of years. They are spreading apart. Europe is spreading apart from the United States at a rate of about 1 inch, 2 inches a year. Now, if you extrapolate that, why, of course, it would have taken millions of years.
Of course, yeah.
But that being the case, that means the United States is actually approaching China at the same rate.
At the same rate, yeah.
Right. So, in other words, you would expect, because the transatlantic ridge is expanding as lava moves up and spreads apart, that the Atlantic Ocean is a much younger ocean by millions of years than the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean would be much older, therefore have much more silt on the bottom of it as compared to the Atlantic Ocean. But when you actually look at the composition of both, you see that they're nearly identical. And the only thing that can explain that is a sudden catastrophic, literally ripping apart of the continents for a very short period of time.
What would cause that?
Basically, what would cause that is an external force on the planet so great that it literally alters the orbital path of the planet on its axis and tilts the planet. The core, the mantle of the planet is basically molten lava.
Right.
On it, we have a very thin crust which is the ground we walk on. If you take the crust and shift it, if an external force was so powerful it could actually shift the entire sphere of the crust of the Earth on that molten lava underneath, it would basically rip apart the land masses, and based on the centripetal force of the planet revolving on its axis, the continents would reshape themselves over a very quick, short period of time, just a matter of a few hundred years. And those catastrophic types of events do explain the ripping up of the continents and what we see how the oceans rest today versus millions of years of slow drifting. In fact, we saw an example just a year ago where we had a rift in Africa called the Afar Rift. Within a matter of 20 minutes, a several-mile-long rift, 300 feet deep, where the continent of Africa is starting to rip itself apart, where scientists were there coincidentally while it was happening. They actually had to take off in their helicopter and film the event because it's one of those rare events that mankind just does not see, where if we were to have seen that 1,000 years ago from now, we would say that rift took 1 million years to form, when in fact we know for a fact it took 20 minutes. It was filmed. There are other such anomalies we see all over the planet that are occurring in our lifetime. When the volcano blew its top, I believe it's, help me out here, George.
Pompeii?
Washington State.
Oh, Mount St. Helens.
Mount St. Helens, correct. What formed in a matter of just 20 days was, in form and structure, a mini version of the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to look at that today, you would think, based on our normal way of geology, that it would have taken thousands of years to form, when in fact we knew it took 20 days.
Do we get any telltale signs as this occurs? Now, I know you said that it's the calamity or an external force. I'm going to ask you about that in a second as well. But do we get any kind of warning? Do we see any signs?
There would be a tremendous... For pole shifts, the type of pole shift, there are...
And you're talking about a physical pole shift.
I am talking
now
about,
we're not talking about the magnetic pole.
Oh, no. That's slow wandering all the time.
All right.
But where I'm talking about a sudden geographic pole shift.
A total flip.
Not necessarily a flip at all. But what I mean is the North Pole, the axis of the Earth alters its spin. So the geographic north and geographic south have moved maybe a couple thousand miles from where they are now.
Okay, well, that's still dramatic.
It's not only dramatic. What makes it extremely dramatic is as the Earth spins on its axis, the equator bulges, the geographic equator.
It's like an egg.
Like an egg. So it is approximately 42 kilometers wider at the equator than it is from the North and South Pole. So that is great. That is more than enough distance to explain all the land masses. In other words, if you were to stop the spinning of the Earth, you could slow it down and stop it, the land masses at the equator would then have no centripetal force pushing them outward, and they would fall back into the ocean 42 kilometers down. That would basically engulf most of the planet in water. And if the North and South geographic poles were to be shifted, and then the Earth be spun back up with a new equator, new land masses would appear, so that the end result of the old land masses compared to the new land masses, you would see that entire civilizations had disappeared overnight. Their cities are now at the bottom of the ocean, and new land masses have risen to the surface. In fact, when we look at the sunken cities around the planet, the most striking thing we find about these cities, and they're massive cities of hundreds of square miles of land, they're not destroyed by any type of volcanic or destructive activity. It's almost like that section of the continent just slowly went into the ocean. We see these land masses or these cities off the coast of Japan, Cuba.
They're everywhere.
India. Yes, they are all over the planet. And we're not talking small little settlements. We're talking massive cities. The largest one is off the coast of Japan that I'm aware of. And, you know, when you look at these, there are massive cities at the bottom of the ocean. Now, if civilization is thriving, like New York City, and New York City slowly starts to fall into the ocean, say an inch a year. Let's say that's very quick.
Okay.
An inch a year.
Which...
People are going to leave New York City and not continue to expand it for 100 square miles.
Right. Even though that sinking would be so slow, they may not know when to leave because they figure, it's going to be thousands of years from now.
But what we see is that these massive cities, hundreds of square miles, are suddenly at the bottom of the ocean.
And when you say suddenly, is this like an instant, boom, it's gone?
We're probably looking at less than a month for the entire event to happen.
Oh, my.
Because if you slowly slow down the spin rate of the Earth, the continents will reshape themselves very quickly. That is the most dramatic catastrophic event, the pole shift. And one of the biggest problems is us humans love the coast and the ocean. So about 25% of the world's population lives within 100 miles of the coast. Unfortunately, when this type of event happens, those people will be the first to go, followed by, of course, technology, any means to keep civilization and technology as we know it alive. Transportation goes, world commerce goes. So basically, no matter how technologically advanced we believe we are, all of our technology comes to a screeching halt, and we're thrown immediately back into the dark ages. Now,
when you talk about an external force did this, what do you mean?
There's a number of reasons for pole shifts. There are catastrophic events that have happened in the past that we believe are due to passing space bodies that come through on a cyclic pattern. Some of the cycles seem to be around 3,600 years. Nostradamus referred to that.
Sounds like Nibiru.
Exactly. There's a number of other books that refer to the same cyclic pattern. But it's a huge gravitational pull that moves through the solar system, and it just slightly disrupts the planetary paths.
All right, but that is what starts to tear the planet apart.
That is what causes some of the events. And now, depending on how close it comes to the planet, it may have no effect, or it could have a devastating effect. What I am talking about is the most devastating effect of them all. Our solar system moves psychically over an extremely long period of time, up and down what the ancient Mayans and modern astronomers refer to as the galactic plane, or the dark rift.
Tell me about that.
The dark rift is a flat disk of which all the stars in our Milky Way galaxy move up and down, and then also spiral around in arms around the center of our galaxy. This dark rift has a very, very large, intense gravitational field to it, and it takes about 20 years for our planet and the solar system to pass through it. During this time, this is the external force that I'm referring to that we have been experiencing for the last 10 years, and it will take another 10 years to completely move through it. We have only started to see the effects of the planet and the solar system entering the dark rift. The very first effect, when we started entering it, was in 1998. The Chandler Wobble came to a halt. It's a very, very slow wobble of the Earth around its geographic pole. And that came to a halt as we started moving through the dark rift, and now it's erratic. There's a whole series of events that we have modeled out in moving through this galactic gravitational wave. A number of them have already started to happen. As I mentioned almost 2 years ago, the number one thing that people should take notice of is that the Earth will undergo a great number of earthquakes, many more than it's ever seen in our recorded history.
And I would guess they would be pretty large ones.
They're much larger. They're larger and they're more frequent. In fact, because this is so important, I mentioned this on the show and that this would be occurring and that it had already started occurring about 2 years ago, and you would continue to see an increase. The official USGS position at that time was that, no, this is not occurring. People just want to see what they want to see in the data. Now, 2 years later, their own data is screaming of the fact that the number of massive earthquakes worldwide has increased 6 to 10 times the normal number of earthquakes per year. And they're not occurring just on the major fault lines on the planet. They are occurring everywhere in diverse places. In fact, last night in the middle of China, where we don't believe there was a major fault line, another 6.5 happened. There's at least one a week greater than 6 that's now happening around the planet. If you go to thehorizonproject.com and go to the news section, the very top news is the latest USGS information about large earthquakes graphed out for you. So you can just, at a quick glance, for the last 100 years, you can see what's happening. So this is absolutely not normal.
Brent, let's talk a little bit about some of the past evidence for some of these events that have occurred. When you talk about these massive underwater cities suddenly sinking, kind of paint a picture for me. Let's say the population, they're doing their daily thing, and what's going on?
Okay. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, nearly every primitive culture on all the continents have legends and folklores of prior civilizations to them.
Right.
That they related as having great scientific knowledge and technology. Many of these cultures even indicated that their prior civilizations, of which they don't have any of this technology and knowledge, had flying machines. Everybody, for the most part, is familiar with the story of Atlantis and how it sunk in a single day.
Well, that's a good point.
And we refer to that as legend. But then again, if you look in the legends of Atlantis, it was written by an individual who claimed to be a historian, and he was claiming to relate historical fact. And that his own writing indicated it wasn't a legend, that it was fact. But the knowledge that we have been collecting and the information we've been collecting around the world does suggest that this actually was the case. So as civilization grows, such as our civilization, we do amass technology, the ability to create electricity, the ability to create meteorology, to circumnavigate the globe, to build flying machines. Now, should a sudden shift befall the planet, a third of the planet will die, probably within 24 to 48 hours, which is approximately all the people living within 100 miles of the coast. This is very grim, 100 miles of the coast. And then after that, there will be disease and famine. Because in our high-tech society, we go to grocery stores for food. And how do we get there? We go with gas and electricity to pump it into our cars. Well, you don't have electricity now. You don't have the gas. You don't have the food in the stores. Now what do? Especially because we've all huddled into large cities. We'll run out of food very quickly. Power grids will come down. Even though we all have the knowledge in our head of how to make these machines. Surgeons know how to do operations, for example. They simply can't do it anymore. So within a generation, the knowledge becomes lost and it becomes legend.
And it takes thousands of years to get back.
Thousands of years. But what do you have left over? You have remnants of carvings, of machines that future generations, 1,000, 2,000 years later, will dig out of the ground, showing complex machinery, complex gear mechanisms that supposedly their generation made, and it didn't exist in primitive society, yet primitive society has these extremely high-tech devices.
Brent, are all these cities submerged, or do they sometimes just get flipped over, buried? The land masses just kind of turn over onto itself.
They seem to go straight down.
Straight down.
They go straight down. In fact, it doesn't look like there's any earthquake-type event that rips them apart.
Let's talk more about this. Also, some forests found underwater at the Antarctica. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, it's reminder time. Sunday night, November 16th, for 5 nights, where you've got our Unexplained television show on the Sci-Fi Network. So do circle that on the calendar and Be sure to watch it. Comes on at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time, 12 a.m. Mountain Time, and 10 p.m. Central Time on the Sci-Fi Television Network. First program Sunday night is on reincarnation. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. Brent Miller, our guest tonight. Brent, tell me about this incredible discovery of forests hundreds of feet under the Antarctic ice.
Actually, that is a perfect example about how fast this event happens. Unlike the New York City event, where it slowly drops, if you have a forest that is slowly dropping in the ocean, it would be dead within a year. It would no longer be a forest within 2 or 3 years, and as it drops under the ocean, there'd be nothing but decayed vegetation that would slowly disappear and vanish.
Mm-hmm.
What we have underneath the Antarctic ice is literally 6 million square miles of tropical forest. It shows that this pole shift, the pole shift that caused that event, was so quick and so sudden, it dropped what was a continent landmass above the ocean, a thriving tropical forest in warm weather, to suddenly be under the ocean and now at the southern pole where it doesn't get sunlight, and so you get layers of ice building on top of the ocean, making it hundreds of feet thick. So it's now buried. This event would have occurred in well less than a year. Otherwise, the forest wouldn't be there, the remnants of the forest, to the extent that we have it. We're not talking an isolated patch here and there. We're talking 6 million square miles.
That's huge. Is that one of the reasons, Brent, that we hear stories of governments, our government, the Russians, always there in that region with submarines, looking for things, testing things, doing research?
There is a number of different reasons and theories why they're there. We're of course, not privy to what they're up to, but we do know that they are building telescopes on the southern ice shelf, looking, towards the south into doing research on the magnetic poles of the Earth. But as far as looking at the bottom of the ocean, I'm not aware of what they might be doing there. While we're in Antarctica, they have dug ice core samples, another great example of the cyclic nature of these events. The ice core samples in Greenland and Antarctica both match each other. When you take a long ice core sample several hundred feet down,
right,
as you go back, as you go deeper, you're going back in time,
That's
layer
right.
by layer. And as each layer is moved through, you can analyze the molecular content that made up that ice at that time, and it has trapped the atmospheric molecules in that layer of ice at that time. So you can tell the percentage of CO2, the percentage of nitrogen, oxygen, argon, etc., in every year. Typically, the error rate is to bracket it in 10-year increments. But what we see is a cyclic event that happens. The overall massive running cycle is 110,000 years. And then you have 5 subcycles within that 110,000 years. But the most important thing is that every so many thousand years, there is a layer of cosmic dust. Interstellar radiation has made it to the deck of the planet, of Earth, and has sealed cosmic dust in that layer of ice. These are the events that we're most concerned about, because these are the events that signify a massive gravitational wave outside the planet that literally shifts the planet, because it would require such a massive external event in order to push dust from the outside of the surface of the Earth to the surface of the Earth.
When do you believe the last catastrophic pole shift occurred?
There's quite a bit of evidence that suggests it occurred in the very recent past. In fact, we have ancient documents that tell us it happened roughly, based on our current calendar system, around 9000 BC. Let's look at
not long ago in the scheme of things.
Not long ago, absolutely not. In fact, let's look at in-your-face data that is just really thrown in your face. The Mississippi River, for example. The Mississippi River flows from the north. It's one of the longest rivers in the United States, other than the Colorado River.
That old man river.
Yep. And while it's traveling, it dumps silt in the delta, in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the rate at which it dumps silt has been very consistent ever since they were measuring the amount of silt it dumps into the delta region, the mouth of the Mississippi. If you look at per year, if you look at the total volume of the silt in that delta, you can extrapolate when the Mississippi River came to be.
Okay.
All right, because every year it dumps so much. And so that accumulates there. It doesn't go anywhere. It accumulates. So if you look at the total amount of silt that's there and extrapolate how much silt is dumped every year and work backward in time, you can determine approximately when the Mississippi was, quote, created.
Now, what do you think?
The estimates are as early as 4,500 years ago, and the oldest estimate is 12,000 years ago.
And what might the calamity, the external calamity, have been? Do you think it was, an extraplanetary system that came by, or was it
that particular event? We believe it was a passing space body with a very large gravitational pull.
And then where did it go?
This gravitational pull, we do have linguistics and translators who basically scour the planet also for ancient text and written records.
Okay.
And this is one of those cyclic space bodies that may run through our solar system occasionally.
Is this Planet X?
People have called it different things. I think the Corbin called it the Destroyer. The ancient Chinese called it something else. Nostradamus called it something else. I mean, it has like a dozen different names.
Does the Bible call it wormwood?
The wormwood is something different.
Okay.
In fact, we can get into that. I would very much like to go into where the Horizon Project has gone recently.
Okay, sure. And we'll come back, because I also want to talk about some of this lost technology with you, Brent.
All right.
But go ahead.
All right. So we believe, based on the Mississippi, the last major pole shift happened between 4,500 years ago and 12,000 years ago. The oldest recorded documents, ancient documents we have, relate to what they refer to as a shifting of the stars at about what our calendar says is about 9,000 BC, which would be within that time period of the Mississippi. Also during that time period, if you date the Sphinx, carbon date the Sphinx, it is older than 10,000
Yeah,
BC.
and I believe that, too.
And if you carbon date the pyramids of Giza, they're not that old. They're only about 3,700, 4,000 BC. But the Sphinx has massive water damage, and the pyramids of Giza do not.
Now, how do they carbon date the Sphinx? I thought it was just all stone.
There's remnants. There's more than just stone in the pyramid and the Sphinx. There's particles of biological material. You can carbon date anything that had carbon matter in it moving from C12 to C14 based on the radiation, while the plant life and plant material was alive during that time. So there's sticks and stones, and there's not stones, but there's sticks and biological debris, not mammal debris, but vegetation type debris that is found in the basically in the structures of those two devices.
And doesn't the Sphinx show massive water damage on the outside?
It does. In fact, this makes perfect sense because of because we know that the Sphinx appears to be much older than the pyramids. It also matches where we believe, in brackets, where we believe the pole shift occurred. So basically, the pole shift created the massive water damage on the Sphinx, and it created the Mississippi at the same time by reorienting the land masses. It may, in fact, since we don't know, we weren't there, it may, in fact, have been an event that helped spread apart a number of the continents and drop some land masses, such as the lost continent of Atlantis legend.
And what might have happened to those civilizations? Wiped out?
I do believe that if they had enough time to prepare, they wouldn't be completely wiped out. They would remember, they have advanced technology.
So they were able to move on.
Right. They would move on. They would survive, but their technology would be lost, and all they would have left is legend. It's interesting to note that we look at our planet. We have 7 continents, and on every continent they have these same legends, and they also have the same basic architecture.
Also sounds a little like Hopi prophecy, Brent.
Yeah, there is prophecy. There is a lot of prophecy, and I would like to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, let's do that next hour.
Okay, but if you look at the various continents, they all have similar structures, large pyramid-type structures. Now, remember, we believe that the ancient people didn't have worldwide transportation, and they were all separate from each other. Why all of a sudden do they all build the same sort of structures on all the different continents and have all the same sorts of legends, unless they were all connected at one time and suddenly they were lost? Well, all the evidence seems to point to that.
So when they fled, assuming they had time, some of them probably did not, but when they fled, they probably went by the thousands, I guess.
I would assume so, yes. In fact, hundreds of thousands scattered around the planet.
Maybe they went from Atlantis to Egypt. Maybe
Right.
they went from Atlantis to Central America.
Well, Atlantis could be just, for instance, if we had a massive overheaval today, the world might refer to the United States as Atlantis, such as a nation that had tremendous technological resources, weapons that could destroy humanity, flying machines. They could have spaceships that leave the planet, and all of a sudden it is now below the ocean.
It's gone.
It's gone. But that doesn't mean there wasn't civilizations on all the other continents at the same time. So a lot of society could have been preserved.
Was their technology so good that they may have left the planet?
I do not believe so.
All right.
No. They do describe flying machines. In fact, many continents in their legends describe flying machines. Many described electricity. We have archaeological evidence that Egypt had discovered electricity. Babylon, many societies had highly advanced metallurgy, medicine. In fact, some civilizations even did brain surgery.
I keep thinking about that tablet in Abydos in Egypt.
Yes.
And, I mean, clearly you can see a helicopter
How
there.
do you explain that?
I know. Clearly you can see it. You can see what looks like a ship or a submarine. There's just, you can't say that's not that because it looks exactly like a helicopter.
Right.
The lost technology that happened so rapidly, some of the people, let's assume that they fled to other regions of this planet, but they probably did so without tools and equipment. They probably grabbed whatever they could and they took off. I guess the same thing would happen here. I mean, if we had to leave, let's say, this region, and assuming we didn't have a planet-wide of sophisticated technology as we do today, but if we had to leave a region where we had this technology and quickly go to another place that we had no technology, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have anything, it would take years to develop that again, wouldn't it? From scratch.
It would take thousands of years because you can't make metal. You don't have the energy to make metal. You don't have the technology. We have created a society that would literally fall apart. The more technologically advanced a society is, the more quickly it will fall apart in this type of devastation. We couldn't survive. Most of us would literally die of disease, famine and disease, shortly after this event. So possibly a quarter would die during the event itself, and another quarter would die within 6 months because of lack of food and transportation. In fact, the only countries that would thrive would be the primitive countries, who right now are doing without these.
They can exist. They know how to exist this way.
Exactly. They don't go to the grocery store to get their food. I mean, they grow it and they find it themselves.
Let's talk just a bit about wormwood and what you think about that.
All right. We have a number of what we've been doing is this. The scientific evidence is so blatant. It is so overwhelming that what we've had to do is sit back and look beyond the science. And when we look beyond the science, we see literally hundreds and thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of documents scattered over at least 3,000 years describing prophecy and end-time sort of events. And these range from many different societies, Egyptian, Sumerian, the Corbin, even the Holy Bible. talks about this. The Hopi Indians, modern-day prophets, Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce.
Edgar Cayce, yeah.
And, you know, what we are rechanging our focus. We're focusing on looking into these prophecies, because what we have discovered is that the correlation between the prophecies and the science, we just cannot ignore the statistically improbable connection between the two. So we have just recently returned from the Middle East, you know, where we had a film crew, where we are reviewing some of the world's most ancient documents in order to uncover what the ancients say is going to happen. And we have a striking number of similarities between the model that we have created and these ancient texts that say what is the sequence of events that will happen. In fact, it is so uncanny you could practically lay them beside each other. Ours is a lot more detailed of what will happen to the Earth and solar system as it moves through the galactic plane. But basically, all the key points are identical. One of the last things as we move through the solar system is what you just referred to as wormwood. One of the texts, Revelations, describes a huge meteorite, one of the last events, which would hit the planet, and its name would be wormwood. Shortly after that event, we see that let me step back and show you a brief example of the model we have of the Earth, to show you how it correlates with what's happening today. What we have is a model of what would happen to our planet and the solar system as it's moving through the galactic plane. And remember, it's already about halfway through it. The worst is yet to come. The very first effect we would see is that the Earth's temperature would increase slightly under the oceans, very slightly, just about 0.2, 0.3 degrees Celsius. This would raise the temperature level of the oceans, at the base of the oceans, very slightly. This has already happened. And this is caused because the crust, the outside hard shell of the planet, is floating on a molten, more liquid fluid type hot layer. As we approach the galactic plane and the spin of the Earth is at an angle with respect to that plane, the gravitational field of the plane pulls on the axis of the Earth. That pulls the crust away around the mantle, causing friction between the mantle and the crust. That heats up the bottom of the oceans slightly. That has already happened. The first effect you're going to see is weather anomalies all over the planet, the globe, because the oceans create a tremendous amount of weather patterns. And since I was on the show last in 2006, we have had more weather anomalies than we've had in the last 100 years. For example, last year, we had a report that summation by the U.S. Geological Society and NOAA that 2007 was the weirdest weather year on record, where we had tornadoes hit New York City, Iran, Oman. We had the first snowfall in Baghdad in 100 years.
And they keep getting stranger every year.
They get worse. Oh, this year, we had the worst snowfall in the Midwest in 98 years. Afghan suffers the worst winter in 30 years. 2 weeks ago, we had over a dozen tornadoes hit the United States.
Let me let you finish that thought, Brent, when we come right back. We'll also talk about prophecy. Oh, yes, prophecy on Coast to Coast AM. What did the Mayan know? And what about prophecies? Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce, the Hopi Indians, and, of course, 2012. In a moment, Brent Miller on Coast to Coast AM. Brent, let's talk a little bit more about those incredible changes that are happening, Earth changes right now at these incredible clips.
Oh, they have been happening, and they are getting worse. As you indicated, the weather anomalies are happening all over the globe, and at an unprecedented level. Same with the earthquakes. You know, as we move through the galactic plane, we expect these to get worse. We expect to see massive weather pattern disruptions, much more so than we've already seen them, to the point where everybody is going to have to take notice. And most people just ignore these things, but now that they are happening all over the globe, they're becoming harder and harder to ignore. One of the things, for example, that has been brought up several times over the last few years is this thing called global warming. Yes, we do put a tremendous amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but our model, the very next phase of our model, after the ocean's temperature rise and these weather anomalies start to appear, the next phase of our model predicts that we will have an increase in global warming and a tremendous rise in CO2 concentration in the upper atmosphere. And that's because ocean water itself contains 60 times the amount of CO2 than does all the emissions that mankind dumps into the atmosphere.
Guys, I'm so glad you pointed that out to Brent, because so many people miss that. They just don't understand.
If you just simply raise the water temperature a half a degree, you have shot the CO2 atmosphere level, you have spiked it. Now, the reason we know that even though mankind in our high-tech society, we do dump a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, the reason we know that the amount we put in the atmosphere is minuscule compared to this natural phenomenon is if you go back and remember I mentioned the ice core samples.
Right.
As they freeze, they lock in the concentration level of one of the gases, CO2, along with the other gases, and we have a chronological record that spans over 450,000 years. This CO2 concentration level cyclically repeats itself over and over again every 110,000 years, with 5 subcycles in between that 110,000 years. So where we are today with our CO2 concentration level is exactly where we were 110,000 years ago, 220,000, 330,000. So this is nothing new to the planet. And we know that mankind wasn't here exactly on those times doing the same thing that we're doing today. But as we continue moving, the solar system continues moving into the galactic plane, we expect that the gravitational pull on the poles of the Earth will do more than just raise the temperature. It'll actually start to shake the Earth. And this is why we predicted the earthquakes would increase in tremendous number and intensity, which is what we're seeing. We expect that to even continue to have greater earthquakes and more frequent as we pass through.
Before we get into prophecy, which I want to talk with you about maybe in 20 minutes or so, let's talk about the Maya, what they knew. You know, this 2012 date is a strange one, Brent, because so many people have their own different theories of it. But let's talk a little bit about your perspective on what 2012 may be and what the Maya knew and how they knew it.
How they knew it is a mystery. But what I believe they are referring to is when the Earth itself, our solar system, comes to the closest it will come to the center of the galactic plane. They refer to it as the dark rift. If you look at the NASA computer-generated images of solar systems, and if you look at them on their edge, you'll see a very faint dark line in their own computer-generated images. Of course, nobody's outside the galaxy to actually take a photograph, so we generate these by extrapolating data by looking at all of the stars. This line is created, this dark line, the dark rift, is created by interstellar dust. Dust, we call it dust, but it actually is consisting of very large asteroids as well that settle on a galactic gravitational wave that emanates from the center of the galaxy. The center of the galaxy, every active galaxy, has a flattened, supermassive black hole spinning, and its gravitational wave spins out like a flat record. And the stars cyclically move around the galaxy on that gravitational wave, and they rotate up and down. Just like our solar system, it is moving up and down. What the Mayans did is they computed very precisely the moment in time that we will hit the center. Our solar system will move down and rest on that galactic plane before it moves through. It refers to this era as one of a devastating era that will happen. In fact, they have many, many legends with regard to these specific events that will happen. One of the most bizarre legends is, and forgive me if I don't have the actual text in front of me at the moment.
All right, you can just
but
paraphrase.
I'll paraphrase.
Sure.
When the four corners of the Earth rest on the dark rift, a cosmic sky portal will be opened up, and basically, in essence, souls will be harvested. It's one of the most interesting and bizarre.
It's profound.
It is, because it actually, some people, if you believe in prophecy, if you're one that believes in prophecy, you might relate that to the rapture of sorts. But if you talk to astrophysicists and quantum physicists, they will say that if the gravitational wave emanating from the black hole is intense enough, there may be a layer intense enough where there may be a very, very slight dimensional rift where people actually move through dimensionally as the Earth passes through. So where the Mayans get these legends, we do not know. We have no science on that, but we do see science that might point to some sort of logic to where the legend comes from, such as we know that when we pass through a black hole, Einstein showed that you do have a dimensional kind of shift. But when they say the four corners of the Earth resting on the dark rift and a cosmic sky portal opens up, it's a little bit too eerie. So we don't know what to make of that. They have other legends, of course, but we do know from astrophysics, and our models are very, very accurate, that they computed a couple thousand years ago, within 24 hours, the precise date at which this event will occur, which will be around December 21st, 2012. Not to say that the pole shift will happen on that date. It could happen a year before that or a year after. That's just the point at which we sit on the middle.
Even if it occurs around that time period or even close, I think that's pretty astounding, don't you?
It is amazing. And in fact, there are more prophecies that science can't begin to explain. For example, there are prophecies that relate to social upheaval and unrest which precede this event. Well, this has nothing to do with science. How could any prophecy understand what our social structure would be like and what we would be going through? In fact, the prophecies up to this event suggest that right before the event happens, we would enter a period of what appears to be a global depression, a global economic depression, if not collapse. Now, we're starting to see the formation of this right now on a social level. In fact, the concept of an global economic collapse was unthinkable a year ago. And now everybody's talking about it as if we're one giant country. And it does look like we are having serious financial problems worldwide, and it's escalating. So I don't know. I call that coincidence. I guess you'll have to decide for yourself about that.
Of course, as you know, Brent, I don't believe in coincidences.
I don't either. Yeah. I don't. But how they knew, the source of their information, is beyond science. That's all I can tell you about that. But in terms of prophecy, the prophecy is just uncanny. When we look at various documents that span literally thousands of years back, for instance, the sequence of events as the Earth then moves, our model that we made years ago before we started looking into prophecy.
Where is mainstream science today, Brent, with regards to the possibility of a pole shift?
This is interesting because of the way science is structured in our society. In fact, every field of endeavor is structured in our society. We focus on very specific topics, and we're very good at those topics. For instance, there are people that study intensely the magnetic structure of the Atlantic ridge as it solidifies, so they can map out the last three pole shifts very precisely. So science knows this for a fact, but that's a very specific, narrow field, but it doesn't make it the mainstream media. There are people who study the effects of the sun and how it interrelates with the weather on the planet, and they're pretty much dead on. There's a few things that are off, but they're pretty much accurate in the interreaction between the sun and the planet and the oceans causing weather anomalies. There are people that study underwater civilizations and who have written books of underwater civilizations basically traveling the globe. And they're very, very scientific, very accurate. And it's mainstream, but it doesn't reach the general public. There are people who have studied the ancient technology, what they refer to as of the gods, lost technology, where this technology originally came from thousands of years ago and why we don't have it today. So all of the individual fields have all the knowledge and they have all the answers, but they don't pull all the pieces of the puzzle together to create an overall picture. And that's a shame because the information is out there. But in order to actually study the information, you have to study ancient technologies, geology, geophysics, quantum physics, general physics, underwater cities, civilizations, cataclysms. The list is mind-boggling. And, you know, we have literally have people who have dedicated their lives, myself included, on studying these phenomena and pulling together the data. We fly around the world interviewing people, collecting the information, and people even fly to us to provide what information they have. But the knowledge is there. It's all there. But it's not disseminated and between the various individual skill sets. And that's where the danger comes from. But I do believe that the governments of this world all know what's going to happen. They have all the knowledge in front of them. They know exactly what's going to happen, and they're preparing for it. Norway made a seed bank. They've already populated it last year with 3 million seeds. They bought an island above the Arctic Circle. They dug into the granite rock 600 feet above sea level, and in a massive rush, 18-month project, they archived all 3 million seeds on the planet. Why would they do that? They know something's coming.
They know something's up.
Yeah, so all the world governments, I believe, know what's coming.
I happen to think that the particle accelerator at CERN may be used for some other purpose as well. I don't think they would spend billions of dollars for just a few experiments, Brent.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I tend to agree with you, but unfortunately we can surmise. I mean, even we have some of our scientists that surmise what they can do with it, especially the quantum physicists, but they talk over our heads, so we don't know at that point.
What gave, because we don't know how, but what do you think gave the Mayans the knowledge? I mean, they must have been, I mean, for a very, this is what is so strange to me, and this is what confuses me. You know, if Apocalypto, that movie, was accurate, they were a pretty violent culture. I mean, granted, they had knowledge of astronomy in things like that, but I mean, they cut off people's heads for religious rituals and things like that. And to me, I don't care what era you're in, that's pretty primitive when you rip out hearts of people that are still alive. What gave them this kind of knowledge to foresee 2012?
Specifically, the knowledge of a calendar that is so precise mathematically, we today don't have a calendar, anything close to that, where they mapped out this last era, the beginning date and the ending date, based on a measuring of the stars that we haven't been able to measure up until recently, and our calendar doesn't begin to approach theirs. So where they got that specific knowledge, I do not know, but there are legends in the Mayan. I wouldn't say legends. There are documents in ancient scrolls that the Mayans themselves say, you know, and I just have to tell you, this is not science. This is what the documents seem to relate, that their knowledge came from men from the stars, and they related to these as almost as demigods, fallen angels, if you will, who taught them and wished to be worshipped, similar to other cultures saying that that referred to them as, say, Nephilim that came down and used mankind. But they actually do indicate that these people existed and wished to be worshipped. And they actually demanded, I mean, even the Aztecs, I mean, they were performing human sacrifice in the order of thousands of their citizens a year for such individuals, apparently. So they didn't generate the knowledge on their own. The mathematics was way beyond anything we knew, or we believed they were capable of.
You sent us a graphic of a catastrophic event. I mean, unfortunately, you know, it's a picture of New York, but I want you to explain it.
Basically, if this event occurs, which all the evidence does show that it will occur within the next few years, the prophecies show that the sequence of events that are prophesied do match the models, the scientific models, the best scientific models today that we have of what is happening and is confirmed to be happening as we're moving through the galactic plane. We do expect the absolute worst scenario to happen, that there will be another pole shift. There'll be a massive loss of life, just as the prophecies indicate as well, and that some continents will reshape themselves. Oddly enough, Nostradamus' modern-day type prophets, not the ancient texts, but even Nostradamus says Mississippi will float backward. Edgar Casey says that five countries in Europe will disappear overnight under the waters. And if this happens, we do believe that the pole shift will result, of course, in a new north and south geographic poles, and there'll be a new equator. When that happens, land masses will disappear, other land masses will reappear. This rendition is a possible outcome of a simple city, New York City, because modern-day Hollywood likes to pick on New York City, so we thought, we wouldn't pick on a different city. We would just pick on the one they knew.
Well, I got to tell you, it's a dramatic graphic.
And we show it to be absolutely devastated. Sand and waves have completely covered it, and it's basically covered in sand and abandoned. In fact, another piece of evidence that shows the United States itself 12,000 years ago was actually at the bottom of the ocean. Outside Las Vegas, on the tops of the mountains, you will have giant coral head, carbon dated at 12,000 years ago. How does coral head, huge coral head, be on top of a mountain, which can only be within about 30 to 60 feet below sea level, and exist? And it is carbon dated 12,000 years ago.
Well, are you saying, though, that some of these ancient areas get pushed back up, too?
Yes. They can be pushed up, they can be pushed down. It depends on where the next shift occurs. And in fact, if you look at the magnetic structure of the various last three pole shifts, there's only one spot on Earth that seems to have been the same temperate climate, roughly speaking, over the last several thousand years, 30,000 years, and that is the Brazilian rainforest. It seems to have been within the same equatorial band for the last three pole shifts. No other place on Earth seems to have had that same luxury. So we expect to find that being the case now that we go to the Brazilian rainforest to see the greatest luscious vegetation, the oldest, the thickest peat moss, etc., and that's exactly what we see.
Brent's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. It's called thehorizonproject.com. He's got a DVD out, which is scary, called The Horizon Project, Bracing for Tomorrow, but it's good information, too. Excellent information, as a matter of fact. When we come right back on Coast to Coast AM, we'll talk with him about prophecies of Nostradamus, Edgar Casey, the Hopi Indians, and a little bit more about the Mayas. Next hour, phone call time with our guest, Brent Miller, on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, let's do our computer chat tomorrow for you Streamlink members. It'll be at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Lots going on, so we can just chat about all kinds of things. So get in the room. Seats fill up awfully fast. We'll chat tomorrow, Streamlink members, 8 p.m. Pacific time. Brent, before we get into some of the prophecies of the Nostradamuses and the Edgar Caseys and the Hopis, tell me a little bit about the Horizon Project, the DVD, Bracing for Tomorrow.
The Horizon Project covers a number of the data that we've already discussed about the 2012 Mayan. It didn't discuss prophecy per se. It's focused strictly on the science. It talks about the underwater civilizations, the past pole shifts, where they occurred, the evidence of the ice cap samples that we've taken, all the scientific evidence that leads to the one inevitable conclusion that we are, in fact, sitting on the precipice of the age or the end of this age, just as the prophets have said and the Mayan calendar indicates. We even interview a number of scientists who, and individuals, and include their information, which discuss the black hole in the center of the galaxy, which could, in fact, explain all these anomalies that we're about to experience, and based on what we're about to experience, what we expect to happen in the future. This is a continuing project. We will have more information released next year. And so it will end up being a total of 3 discs. But the first one is out, and we will be releasing a couple more to basically summarize, combine the science with the prophecy, because we're finding the prophecy so fascinating we can't ignore it. It is just too coincidental. And like yourself, I don't believe in coincidences. But up until recently, we have focused on the science, and we are exhausting the science, and we haven't found anything to contradict. Everything is pointing to this event, and the prophecies are also pointing to it.
Let's talk about some of the specific folks involved in this prophecy, of course, and tell me what you think they saw, what they meant. Nostradamus, let's start with him.
Well, Nostradamus talked about a pole shift. He refers to a single day where everybody on the planet falls over, literally due to a tremendous gravitational flux in the planet. As you know, he wrote his quatrains or his prophecies in quatrains, and they're very encryptic.
Yes.
But this one doesn't seem to be encryptic at all. He just doesn't give us the time frame, unfortunately. It's hard to pin down his time frames, but he does talk about a time frame which appears to be centered around world wars and disasters, nations fighting against nations, similar to things that we see happening around the world today. He also talks about events where he describes what appear to be missiles in flight. But the prophecies that we're interested in are the ones that deal with Earth-changing events in a big gravitational flux that causes everybody in a single day to fall down. That seems to be like a pole shift to us. Edgar Cayce, as you know, the sleeping prophet, he did a number of readings, as they called them, quite a number of readings about future events. And his focus, along with Nostradamus, was, of course, the England and Europe and France.
I was going to say, what happens to England? My God, if anything like this happened, they're gone.
They could likely disappear. The prophecies don't say specifically what happened to them, but they could actually disappear because they're low-level elevation, and unfortunately, they're probably the first to go.
Now, this shift, when it occurs, and you talked about 1,000 miles, give or take. So some areas of this planet will remain intact, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I would estimate that the majority of the planet will remain intact. It's just that the populated areas, the ones by the oceans, even if they are intact afterward, they will be devastated because a shift will cause massive tidal waves all over the planet. It will make the December 26, 2005 tsunami in Indonesia look very, very small. I'm not trying to diminish the devastation.
I understand.
But it will be minuscule. In fact, we have evidence from the last pole shift that there was a massive, what I can't even call it a tidal wave. It's basically the water on the Pacific Ocean flooded very quickly for the entire width between Asia and the United States, making a giant wave 600 foot high all the way up to the top of Alaska, where we found sea creatures 600 feet in caves above the ocean level right now. The wave went 600 feet in the air all along the entire Alaskan ridge, all the hills. So it basically swamped everything. These massive waves would devastate probably a third of the planet in terms of population almost immediately.
Edgar Cayce saw a map of North America,
Yes.
and it looked pretty darn scary.
Yes.
Right?
I remember that map. This country will no longer apparently be what it is today.
Dramatically altered.
Correct. And that is probably most likely because we see there's a number of prophecies. We have well over 10,000 different documents that refer to different prophecies. None of them, not a one, of the ancient documents refer to the New World or this portion of the planet in any way. So either we are not significant in any way to future prophecy after this event, or we don't exist. Either way, we're of no consequence with regard to what happens to the planet after this event. And there's a lot of prophecies that discuss the planet after this pole shift event occurs. So I do believe that map that Edgar Cayce came up with might have some bearing. But of course, there's no scientific way of explaining it. It's quite possible. Just like the coral on the top of the mountains that we see today, we know that this country was under the ocean in the recent past. In fact, let me diverse just for one moment to show you how quickly this world can change.
Okay,
very
sure.
Quickly. I indicated that not all world catastrophic events result in a pole shift. Well, I don't believe you're aware, maybe you are, but I don't believe most people are aware that just a few thousand years ago, at 705 BC, a major worldwide catastrophic event occurred. It actually shifted the entire planet, but it was not a pole shift. In fact, during that time, King Hezekiah reigned, and the sun moved backward in the sky. It did not set. It simply, the planet stopped revolving in its current direction, and it moved backward about 10 hours worth, of almost half of a revolution. And then whatever gravitational wave or passing space body affected it, it released it, and then it continued to move forward in the same direction. At that very same time, 705 BC, according to our current calendar, the ancient Chinese, who were great astronomers, they recorded that the sun set twice in the same day. It set, it rose back up from the west, and it set again. Now,
that sounds like we were doing the moving.
Right. Now, during that time, before that time, we have discovered, it is very well documented over hundreds of years. There are historically 15 ancient calendars that were discovered before that time, that existed before 705 BC. 15 ancient calendars. Every one of those calendars has 360-day years. Every calendar is based on a 360-day year. After that event, every calendar for the next 5 years, all around the planet, all the civilizations changed their calendars. The Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Persians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Mayans, the Hindus. There's every civilization that existed during that time over the next 5 years readjusted their calendars to 365-day years.
Something happened. How did they know this?
They knew it because the stars didn't line up. In fact, they took various approaches. It was very interesting. Numus Pompilius, the second king of Rome, recognized the original calendar, but he added 5 days per year to it to adjust. King Hezekiah, Numa's contemporary at that same time, reorganized the Jewish calendar in a very bizarre way. He added a month each Jewish leap year on a cycle of every 7 and 19 years to make up the adjustment. Other civilizations made different adjustments as they saw the rotational speed of the Earth change as it moved around the sun. So over the period of the next 5 years, all the civilizations caught up to 365-day years. And today, we have 365-day years, but we didn't have that in the immediate past. Before 705 BC, they were 360 days.
That is amazing.
So it just shows you that not all global catastrophic events, it also shows you how frail we are. We don't know what caused that, but we assume it was a passing space body because we are no longer near the galactic plane like we're approaching now. So if something that small, a passing space body, could cause that, obviously with enough gravitational pull to affect the planet, as our entire solar system passes through this gravitational plane, we expect massive upheaval, as we're starting to see with the earthquakes. And then as we pass through it, we expect to be bombarded by series of small asteroids followed by larger asteroids as we continue to pass through it. The asteroids, of course, are the dust and the settling matter along the dark rift. And this is where I come back to your question about wormwood. Mm-hmm. The prophecies that you're talking about, the one that specifically mentions wormwood, It mentions that after it talks about a series of events, starting with a pole shift of no less. The exact wording would be similar to the sky recedes as a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island is moved off of its foundation. Well, if you look at the planet and use terminology that you don't have scientific terminology back then, but if you use whatever terminology you have and you say that every mountain on the planet and every island on the planet is moved off of its foundation, that certainly sounds like a pole shift to me.
Absolutely.
What we expect in our model is exactly what the prophecies then indicate. Now that your atmosphere is stripped, I mean, it just said it rolled away like a scroll, you are at risk to incredible solar radiation or CME blasts. And what is the next prophecy in this series of things? You have literally, if I can, let me find. What I would like to do is I would like to find a phrase that describes that particular event. Here it is. Let me read to you a phrase from one of the prophecies that you're referring to, and explain it. And hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees were burnt up.
Good my.
Okay, now, remember, they don't have scientific terms. If you rip apart the atmosphere of Earth with a pole shift, you are now exposing the upper atmosphere. If a CME blast from the sun, coronal mass ejection, now makes it to the Earth because its magnetosphere has been altered. In other words, our quote, what is protecting the Earth is now down. We are easily susceptible to the solar winds. In other words, the CME from the sun. That is the fire. Also, as it approaches the upper atmosphere, the 270 degrees minus Celsius temperature of the outside frigid space now touches the upper atmosphere, which is basically water vapor. It would suddenly turn to ice crystals instantly. There's your ice. The hail, which is ice, and fire, the CME, are mixed together and mingled with blood. You're looking at a sequence. It is now moving toward the Earth. What is instantly vaporized? These 43,000 airplanes that are flying at any given moment, and all the people aboard, plus all the flying birds and animals in the air.
Gone.
So in other words, there's your mingled with blood, and then it continues. What does it do? It continues to make it to the deck, and they are thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees are burnt up. In other words, this is a great sequence of events to describe a simple CME blast that literally fries a third of the planet.
But the fact they were able to predict this is
Exactly.
scary.
Now, the next sequence of events is what we would also expect. You have small asteroids hitting the land, hitting the sea, followed by a very large asteroid, what is referred to as wormwood. Now, this is the really interesting part about wormwood. You wanted me to give you my take on it. It seems to be a significant. Now, how do they actually? What divine information presents? What divine information they acquire in order to give you an exact sequence in such extreme detail that science can't even begin to touch. I mean, I'll have to leave that to you for right now. But they discuss wormwood not because it's significant so much, but because of what it does next. A very large, what is like a star or an asteroid, falls to the Earth, and the very next thing that happens is a third of the day and a third of the night don't shine. A third of the moon, a third of the stars, a third, etc. But this is not an obscuration.
Right. It's not like dust in the air.
No, because dust in the air is described next, and it uses different words. This is actually a speeding up of the planet. The asteroid wormwood actually hits the planet at an angle, so our Earth speed no longer is 365 days. And we now know that it is very simple to alter the spin of the Earth because it happened 705 BC. So basically we have a whole sequence of events. How they could know anything about this is beyond human ken. I'm just telling you that just right up front. So prophecy is absolutely amazing, but what is more amazing to us is we created a scientific model, a very precise scientific model. And we see that these prophecies model very precisely what we feel this model would present.
Let's talk about this horizon model when we come back at the top of the hour, but let's end this very quickly with the Hopi Indians, Brent, if you would. Again, very similar in prophecy to Nostradamus, Casey, and the Mayans.
Very similar. In fact, the Hopi and the Aztecs had very similar prophecies. In fact, they were almost identical, their calendar systems, and they related a number of earthquakes that would happen before the end. They also said that a period of 7 years, they called it a time of purification, what other religious texts would say called the tribulation would occur. In fact, we may be in that right now. And so the Hopi Indians referred to this, breaking away where there would be wars and there would be pestilence and there would be famine and disease. And so it looks like, based on their description, especially when they mingled it with the massive increase in intensity of earthquakes, which we are now seeing, it looks like this has already started.
And what's so amazing, countless ancient scrolls all over the planet, scrolls discovered, talk about things like this.
And what is interesting about legends in these scrolls is they don't contradict each other. See, in our world
no, they're all
today,
similar, aren't they?
Oh, they're all very similar, and that is when you have to sit up and take notice. Because today, everything's everybody's opinion. But back then, it wasn't opinion. It wasn't written down unless they felt it was accurate. And so, for the vast majority of these predictions, they all agree with each other. A number of times they come from different perspectives, but because they agree with each other, you have to take notice and wonder how all of these predictions from different civilizations, different languages, different spans of time, thousands of years apart from each other, how they could all come up with the same thing.
Brent, when we come back, let's talk about the Horizon Project model on how this is going to occur, and then we'll take phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, we're going to take your phone calls this hour with Brent Miller. Also, we'll check in on the Horizon Project model, which indicates how this will happen in sequence next. Brent, let's talk about the Horizon Project model now and how it indicates what will happen and in the sequence it will happen.
All right. We discussed a number of points in it, and so let me just go over it very briefly. The very first thing we said would happen as we approach this, imagine the solar system. It's not just the Earth. It's a solar system moving into a gravitational wave. And the further it goes into it, the denser the wave becomes and the more it affects the planet and the solar system. So it's not a paper-thin wave. It has width, and it takes about 20 years to go through. So we started moving through it in 1998. The very first thing we would expect is that a kind of a gripping effect would happen on the planet Earth, and we saw the effect of that from the Chandler wobble stopping. The Earth stopped its normal 15-meter diameter wobble every year, where the north and south poles were no longer rotating around a cycle of 15 meters in a circle each year. Mm-hmm. The next thing, we knew that the oceans, it would pull on the poles and create friction, and that would heat up the bottom of the oceans, which we've seen. That would increase the temperatures, causing tremendous weather anomalies, and we're going to see more.
And not just from volcanic activity underwater, right?
No. We're talking just very, very slight friction. We're so slight. We're talking a fraction of a degree. Like 0.2, 0.3 degrees. That's it. So we're not talking about eruptions or volcanoes causing it. We're just talking about the mantle of the Earth rubbing against the crust of the Earth, causing more friction between the two of them, which is below the oceans and below the surface of the Earth. So this increases the weather temperature, which dramatically affects the weather on this planet, as we see. And we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years the weather anomalies are getting worse and worse. Mm-hmm. We also see that the CO2 in the upper atmosphere is going through the roof, which our model expects because of the amount of CO2 seawater holds. All you need is to raise it a very small amount, temperature-wise, and it releases a tremendous amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. After all, 70% of our planet is covered by ocean water. While this is going on, we expect to see greater and more frequency of earthquakes. And if you go to that chart is absolutely amazing. There is no data.
That's at thehorizonproject.com.
Right, at thehorizonproject.com. If you click on the news link at the top and look at the first link, no data was extracted. The chart was not manipulated in any way. It is pulling real-time data from the USGS and graphing it. You can see it graphing it for you in real time, and it is amazing their own data. They cannot hide the fact that the number of earthquakes is shooting through the roof worldwide for the very large earthquakes, level 6 and above. This will continue, by the way, as we get closer to the center of the galactic plane. The number of earthquakes, the frequency and intensity will continue to increase, just like we predicted in the past, and we see it happening. One thing we did not expect was that we knew that the solar system would be affected, but we didn't really focus on the sun itself. And we have noticed that the sun's heliosphere has dropped 25% since the starting of this passage. Just like the Earth has a kind of a protective shield around it that's due to its magnetic field that protects it from the solar wind of the sun itself, the solar wind radiates particles that emanate spherically around our entire solar system beyond the orbit of Pluto. This shield effectively protects us from the interstellar radiation. Now, in the last 10 years, since we started entering in the galactic plane, the heliosphere of the sun has dropped 25%. If it continues to drop,
that's dramatic.
It's massive. In fact, NASA is worried about it. They are seriously worried. 2 weeks ago, on October 19th, they launched an IBEX satellite, an Interstellar Boundary Explorer satellite, just to investigate this phenomenon because they don't know what to think. If it continues to decrease, the solar radiation outside of our solar system could effectively reach intense levels within our solar system, potentially hitting Earth. And so it is causing concern for them, enough of a concern for them to launch a satellite just to investigate just this one phenomenon. As we continue, the next thing, unfortunately, we expect, and I say it's unfortunate because there's no other precursor type events, is the pole shift itself. We're going to get to a point in time where the pressure of the gravitational plane on the Earth's poles as it rotates is going to be great enough where it will cause the geographic shift of the poles of the Earth. When that happens, even though it's minor cosmologically, to us it's devastating.
Huge.
Everybody on the coast will, of course, be better off if they were inland. We will lose technology immediately. Basically, all electricity will stop. Our model anticipates a series of electromagnetic pulses, which will effectively render all electronics on the planet useless. Generators, cars, power plants. So we'll basically be thrown into the dark ages overnight. There will be no longer any such thing as airplanes flying or ocean-going vessels. We would then expect the possibility, because the Earth's protective shields are down from the magnetics, the fields that protect the Earth right now due to the magnetic field of the Earth, protecting us from the solar winds. Because those are down, we would expect that it is possible that the Earth could be hit by massive solar emissions. Prophecy tells us this will happen, as we mentioned a little bit ago. And as we move through the galactic plane itself, through the dark rift, we expect to be bombarded by small meteorites and then finally large meteorites. Potentially, one would be large enough and hit us at such an angle as to alter the spin rate of the planet as well. And prophecy, ironically, tells us those things are going to happen. And of course, as we emerge out the other side, what would we expect to find? We expect to find a world that has no food, no technology, and everyone is scampering to try to survive.
That's a scary outcome, Brent.
But this is where prophecy even continues. ironically. It talks about our social structure and what we will do afterward. It talks about a massive war. It refers to as Armageddon that will be fought in at the basically where the three crossroads of the earth meet: Europe, Africa, and Asia, where they all come together in that plane. It talks about an army that will muster 200 million men. China right now boasts that they can create an army of 200 million men overnight. But you know what? This war won't be because people just decide to go to war. It will be for pure survival. We have no technology. We have no food. We have no ability to get food or transport it. Your only option is to take it. And so Armageddon, in fact, will probably be a war of necessity for survival. Yeah. In fact, you know, when I said earlier that I believe the governments of the world know what's going to happen, I do believe that wholeheartedly. We know that certain rulers, in our opinion, are crazy, and I won't say why, but let's take the president of Iran. About a year and a half ago, he made a public statement that he didn't care what the United States wanted in regards to him stopping his nuclear proliferation program and research because, and I quote, he needed to get ready for Armageddon, unquote. So, you know, I believe the governments of the world know what's going to happen, and each in their own way is preparing for these events. And unfortunately, the people who are left in the dark are the common person that just goes to work every day hoping that tomorrow will be the same as the day before. I am painting a very grim picture, but it does look, and I feel, you know, wholeheartedly that unfortunately this is going to happen. All the scientific evidence does point to this happening, and then when you combine that with prophecy, and they dovetail almost perfectly, I mean, it is just too much to overlook.
All right, let's go take some calls, Brent, and we'll continue chatting here as well. Let's go to our west of the Rockies line, Will, driving around in Colorado. Go ahead.